Hello everybody, Shinjo here and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be discussing Pokemon Journeys as a whole. I've done previous reviews on the other Pokemon series, and since Journeys is basically done, I figured now it's a good time to review it as a whole and discuss what I liked, discuss what I didn't like, but there are going to be a couple of twists. First of all, in normal reviews where I discuss things I like and things I didn't like and just group them all together, I have different categories this time because there are different things that I can discuss in Journeys as a whole. The second thing, I'm not including any of the special episodes. The only one that might sway me is the Legend Arceus specials focusing on Heatran because they happened around the same time as Journeys. But the Distant Blue Sky special episode and the 11 episode series aren't going to be included in this because episode 136 just seemed like a perfect cap off for Journeys. I don't think those episodes are really going to influence my decision on this show. So jumping right into this, let's talk about the biggest thing with the show, the characters. There are two, you could argue three main characters in this show, and the first one is obviously Ash Ketchum. I'll get into more about this later on down the line. But in hindsight, knowing that this is his last show, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Again, I'll discuss more about the future of Journeys at the end of the video, but more about Ash in Journeys. First thing, I really liked how the World Coronation was introduced, how it was set up, but it ran into trouble pretty quickly where there were moments where they skipped over battles, like the first time Ash lost to B, he basically went off screen to rank up again to battle B. It would have been nice to see that because there were so many times in Journeys, there were long stints where there was no battle episodes at all. The other thing, and granted you could argue this for every single Pokemon show, Lucario was built up to be his ace the whole time. It's a Pokemon that people always wanted him to get. It's a Mon that he was able to Mega Evolve, his only Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. They reintroduced the aura part of Ash's character, and he even toppled big opponents like Raihan's Duraludon. The issue I have is there were so many times they went out of their way to subtly point at the audience and saying, remember, Lucario is supposed to be Ash's ace. The nail in the coffin for that was the episode where Pikachu got jealous of Lucario, which just seems so out of character, because given Pikachu and Ash have been best friends for 20 plus years, that just felt so out of character in my opinion. But another thing that I did like is the end of the World Coronation. Specifically his battles with Leon and Cynthia, they were really nice and a good wrap up to his story. Granted, there are minor issues that I have. Even though I like the Steven battle, it doesn't sound as interesting as a battle with somebody like Lance or even Alon like everybody wanted. And I still think it would have been better if the Ash Cynthia battle would have ended with Mega Evolved Pokemon on both sides. But the way it ended was still nice, and the Leon battle was actually really good. I think it kind of hurt, in my opinion, that I didn't watch it all at once. If I would have just binged those 4 episodes together, it might have been more enjoyable for me, but as it stands, it was still good. And on that note, each one of Ash's team members got a big win in the show. You can already say Pikachu is Ash's ace, so it didn't really have anything to prove. But, like I mentioned earlier, Lucario beat Raihan's Duraludon, Dracovish and Surfetch did amazing in the battle with Drasna, Dragonite soloed Lucario, and unfortunately Gengar's only big win that I can think of is the battle with Marnie. But that's still good because it gives Ash's Pokemon some sort of spotlight. It's not always Ash's Pikachu and Lucario always going into battle, even though that's what it seemed like during this course of the show. But unfortunately, since Leon was the goal that Ash was reaching towards during the whole show, we knew that Leon wasn't going to lose during the entirety of the anime. That's what I felt made battles like Leon versus Alon and then Diantha so aggravating, because the Diantha battle wasn't even fully shown on screen, and the Alon battle was basically a sweep. If they wanted to keep Alon's team a surprise, they certainly did that, but it just made Alon seem like he was overpowered for basically no reason. But to wrap it off, I think that this is the most consistent that Ash has been since Sinnoh, in my opinion. Because you have series like Unova, where he definitely amps up on the dumbness, and Kalos, where he amps up on the more serious side of him. Maybe Alola, you could argue, is a good representation of Ash as well, but especially in Journeys, there are moments that he acts serious and even gets depressed, like after he loses to Bee, but overall, he is just a kid, and something like this makes perfect sense for him. But that's all I can talk about with Ash for the moment. So let's go on to the next main character of the show, Go. Go is definitely a divisive character when he came out. As far as Go as a character, I can understand why people didn't like him. I never really minded. I didn't overly love him. I didn't overly despise him. He was just down the middle. There were really never big moments from him that made me appreciate his character. And I think that stemmed from how he captures so many Pokemon. Especially early on in the show, there was that one episode that he caught probably half a dozen, probably even a dozen Pokemon in one episode. And it gets worse when there are moments that they're at Sakuragi's lab, and I see a Pokemon in the background, and I suddenly remember he caught that. For the longest time, I forgot that he released one of his Flabébé because he's caught so many Pokemon, it just feels insignificant. And that gets very upsetting when you realize that the only Pokemon that he uses to battle with are Cinderace and Inteleon. There are other moments that he uses Pokemon like Scizor and even Raichu and other of his mons for different scenarios, but Cinderace and Inteleon were always his go-to, and Grookey was just there for comedic effect. Whether he worked or not, that's down to personal preference. I personally didn't like Grookey, but I can understand that people might. The other issue that I have is his goal of Project Mew happened late into the show that they had to speed through the missions. And that is a big factor in why the Masters 8 felt rushed. If they would have started Project Mew from early episode 20 even, and just build it up, they could have easily spaced out that between the Masters 8 and had it feel more fleshed out. There are so many episodes focusing on Go capturing a Pokemon that I legitimately forget about. The one where he had the Project Mew mission that he got the Kingdra, the Alolan Ninetales episode, the Absol episode. There are so many episodes about Go that I just don't remember, but I'm not sure if that's because I wasn't invested with Go as a character or because I didn't care. Speaking of somebody that didn't care, let's move on to the final character in our trio, Koharu. I'm going to be flip-flopping between Koharu and Chloe, mainly because I use both of them, but I watch it primarily in the sub. But just from what I already said, you could probably tell how I feel about her. She started off good. I like the idea of her feeling pressured to follow in her dad's footsteps because he's a professor, but they didn't really go anywhere with it. Her arc basically started when she got Eevee, and then it just ended up being meeting random characters of the day, and Serena, that had evolutions, and that was basically it. Nothing really amounted to anything from it, except for maybe the Lana interaction, where Lana mentioned that Eevee could just stay as an Eevee, and that's it. Although there were some pretty cool moments with the Eevee episodes. I liked the one where she met her doppelganger that had the Espeon and Umbreon. Obviously, the episode where Serena returns is a big talking point, but I also like the episode where Erica returns, because it makes sense for Erica to have a Leafeon. I wouldn't be surprised if she has that in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. But unfortunately, I just didn't really care about Koharu because she didn't really interact with Ash. There are even early episodes where she didn't even interact with Ash at all. I might have cared more if she traveled with him more, but she just stayed back in the lab or went to school half the time. The Fossil episode where Ash gets Dracovish was pretty nice because she actually does something, but unfortunately she was just sidelined half the time, and then her plot just felt rushed near the Masters 8. I guess in hindsight, her decision to become a research fellow after Ash and Go leave, it's okay. It does kind of go back on her story arc beginning because she didn't want to follow in her dad's footsteps, but here she is following in her dad's footsteps, so I don't know what to make of that. But I guess with that taken care of, I can briefly talk more about the Masters 8 and Project Mu because they're realistically the two big arcs in the show. There isn't really much more that I could add between the two. Like I mentioned at the start, the Masters 8 felt kind of slow-paced at first and then just felt rushed. And especially in the Masters 8, the recap episodes didn't help the situation. And they just kind of shoehorned in Koharu's end plot and that was it. But there is another minor thing that I could talk about that I haven't really touched on yet. And I like to call it nostalgia. Basically, this series is a gold mine for anybody that's watched the original series. There are so many Easter eggs, references, and all that stuff in this anime. The Mewtwo that Ash and Go meet is most likely the same one from the first movie. Characters like Paul, Lance, Cynthia return. And overall, all I can say about that is it's really cool, and referencing other things, I was seriously floored when Ash met his Butterfree in the last episode. I would have liked to see more rather than it just being a montage, but for what it did, it was really good. And especially that climax of the Leon fight where Pikachu remembers all of Ash's Pokemon, that's really good. And for a story that wraps up Ash's adventure, it's fine. I feel like they could have done more, like Ash meeting his Pidgeot, Ash meeting his Primeape, but I understand there's only so much they can do. But to wrap off this review, I want to discuss another few cons that I didn't get to discuss previously. Like I mentioned before, there's so much filler, especially during the League, but not even just the League. There were those two-part episodes that just didn't go anywhere. Nobody caught anything, nobody evolved anything. There was that random turtle race episode, the Marstomp being stuck in the ground, the two Slowpoke episodes, the Magikarp episode, and I just didn't like it. I mean, the first one was fine because it was something different, but after a while it just felt kind of lazy in a way. Granted, I don't know what happens behind the scenes, so that might sound harsher than what I mean to say it, but I just didn't really care for the filler and was more invested in stuff like Masters 8 and Project Mu, to an extent. Tying back to discussing nostalgia, since there was so many things in the show that I could call nostalgia pandering, like for example, Ash gets a Gengar, Ash gets Lucario, which everybody always wanted. There are so many moments that are just nods to people that watched from the very beginning. It never really felt like a Galar series. Obviously, Leon was the end goal, but it just didn't feel complete as a Galar series. They completely pushed the Sword and Shield storyline to a 4-part miniseries, which was definitely something. But there are characters like Bede that never even shown up, and Hop only get a very minor cameo near the end of the show, and it's just a spectator. Marnie got one episode, which is definitely disrespectful. It just never felt like a Galar series because half of the gym leaders don't even show up. If I'm not mistaken, only a handful of Galar gym leaders even shown up, which is kind of upsetting because you could have incorporated that into the Masters 8 plotline. You have characters like Alistair that help them out with Gigantamax and Gengar, but you could have had characters like Melanie help them to train against an upcoming ice battle against Price. I don't know. You could have easily incorporated Sword and Shield characters. I'm impressed with how much screen time Sonya actually got in the show, considering how much they shafted Sword and Shield's plotline. But overall, even with all those criticisms, I still liked Journeys. It definitely had some problems, but looking back on it, I'm gonna remember it more fondly for being Ash's last series rather than negatively for all the filler. And that's what I want to close this out with, because in the very last episode, after the episode ended, it was revealed that after the 11-part series in January, Ash is officially going to be retiring. In April, they're going to be starting a new series with 2 new protagonists. There isn't really much I can say about this. I was considering making a video on its own, but there isn't really much I can say at the moment. All I can say is I don't want to say it feels bittersweet for Ash to leave. It definitely does. When you watch a show like Yu-Gi-Oh! Alongside this, where they replace the protagonist each series, it feels kind of weird because Ash has been around since I watched the show. So it's definitely odd to see. But as far as the new series, I just hope that it's good. It's definitely going to be a tough act to follow after Ash, but I hope that they can pull it off. That is my review of Pokemon Journeys. If you enjoyed, hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you haven't. I'll see you next time. Momentai.